The Adirondack Hunt Podcast is brought to you in part by Seek Outside Tents. Seek Outside is an American company producing lightweight, versatile tents and titanium stoves. The Big Woods Bucks team and their friends have hunted the Adirondacks with Seek Outside hot tents and found that it's the best way to get back into the wilderness areas and have a remote hunt. With few roads and hiking trails the only way to access the extensive backcountry of the Adirondacks, your pack needs to be as light as possible. Seek Outside's lightweight tents and stoves enable you to get back there into the most remote country and hunt mature Adirondack bucks that likely have never seen a human being. Use code BWB at checkout on SeekOutside.com and get 10% off your Seek Outside gear. Good luck on your remote hunt in the big woods. Welcome to the Adirondack Hunt Podcast, a Big Woods Bucks production. In this podcast, the Big Woods Bucks crew from New York sits down and discusses all things hunting and even a little fishing within the blue line. 6 million acres of old-growth forest and few roads make the Adirondacks one of the most challenging places to hunt in the country. From Iroquois and Algonquin deer drives to the early days of Adirondack guiding, the team discusses the history, legends, and lore of these ancient mountains. Along the way, the team interviews top Adirondack hunters, from well-known legends to little-known local legends, homing in on what it takes to be successful in these unforgiving woods. Welcome back to the Adirondack Hunt Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Connor, CEO of Big Woods Bucks and video guy. And we're up in Wells, New York today. Mark's here.
Hi, everybody.
And we have, I know I say every guest is special, but I couldn't mean it more with this guest. This is someone who's inspired me personally in my hunting journey and my fishing journey, which we'll get into both of those worlds that he is a master in. And I will call him a master. I'm sure I know he's humble enough to maybe not accept it, but I'm going to say it anyway. He is a master. He's been published. There's stories about him have been published in the Burlington Free Press, Outdoor Magazine, and in Del Green's Wide Racks and Tall Tales. He is, if ever the L word applied, legend. It's to Jim. Now, I think I've probably made him sufficiently uncomfortable with all that praise that we can get started. So, welcome, Jim, to the Adirondack Hunt Podcast. We're so happy to have you.
Hi, Jim.
So I first connected with Jim at a brookie pond 5 years ago, but I think I was aware of you because Wells is a small enough town, and obviously I knew your sister Debbie, and you guys have lived in Wells for generations, I think, right? Your family?
Yeah, my mom was born here, and her family is from here, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Just say a little bit more about Jim so we can kind of frame out the discussion, the things I want to ask him about. Jim is a super well-rounded outdoorsman. He's a buck hunter, obviously, but he's also an incredible brookie fisherman. He traps. He is an incredible Nordic skier, and just an all-around excellent outdoorsman. He is one of the premier traditional Adirondack pack basket makers in probably North America, the world. So that's just to frame things out and give you a sense of Jim. We're hoping today to talk about buck stories with Jim. So you grew up in Wells entirely.
Yeah, my mother is from Wells. My dad's from Caroga Lake. When they got married, he worked for Nationwide, so they moved away when we were very small. But my parents divorced when I was 5. We moved right back here to Wells.
Got it.
And so I've been here.
And you went to Paul Smith's.
Yeah, I'm a graduate of Paul Smith's College.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you were a forest ranger pretty soon after that?
I was the wilderness ranger. It would have been not long after graduation. I got a job as the wilderness ranger for the Siamese Ponds Wilderness Area. I was there 10 years.
Okay. And
I was canvassed twice. I could have had forest ranger jobs on Long Island and Dutchess County.
I bet you're glad you
chose not to do that.
Yeah. Wilderness ranger, is that a different position than forest?
It is. At the time, a wilderness ranger was. It's a long story, but yes, it was different. I was what they called a permanent seasonal employee. I worked 8 months out of the year for the state.
Got it. Okay.
My district was the Siamese Ponds Wilderness Area.
Got it.
and it was great.
Yeah.
I worked with forest rangers. If there was any search and rescue, fire control, anything in the Region 5, they'd call me in on it. And I got a lot of great experience, worked with a lot of fantastic men. And, by the time I was done, these guys were great friends, and they were like, the system's screwed up, Jim. You should be able to just step right into one of these other positions. And, there were searches that, forest rangers called me and said, no, you got to run it. It's the Siamese Ponds Wilderness area. You got to go try to find these guys. I'll have a couple of rangers to go with you, and you go do it. And, just fantastic. Some of these guys are really something.
Yeah.
So while you were the wilderness ranger, did you, let me ask you about your early experiences as a young person. Did you have a mentor that taught you how to hunt and the style? And
Yeah. How did you develop the skill set that you have?
yeah.
Really, I was self-taught. I was kind of a loner. As a kid, I started trapping very young. My parents divorced. My mom, her father was a very well-known trapper. So my grandfather was somebody I looked up to. He died when I was 4. But I heard stories about him all over. And as I grew up, people say, oh, your grandfather was an unbelievable shot. And, he was,
Yeah.
But my mother was really enthralled with her father. And so when I trapped and caught stuff, she was really praising me for.
Yeah.
And that kind of spurs you along as a young boy.
Yeah, it does.
Because it pleases your mother, And
Right.
so, I would cross the Lake Algonquin, in a little tiny boat
Yeah.
at 4 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
before school. And dark out, of course, sometimes rainy, sometimes a big chop on the water. And
Yeah.
it was a little,
Harry Carey.
yeah, it was sketchy, So, and, I'm trying to angle across the lake and get to the opposite shore and go up the shoreline into a big marsh. And I remember, I think I'd been doing it about 3 weeks or something. And, when he'd come back, there'd be a guy along Little Amsterdam that had his light on, and he'd be in the window and he'd wave to me, And I knew him. He was a, local mason, a good one.
Yeah.
And so finally he would come out and say, hey, you must go over in the dark. And I always see you coming back. And I said, yeah. And he said, how can you tell where you're going? I said, I can't. And he said, well, fix that. He said, I'll put my light on. I'm up early anyways. He
Like
said,
a lighthouse.
yeah. He said, what time do you start? And I said, around 4.
Yeah.
Every morning, about 3:45, on came the light. And I'd row, and then I could just look over my shoulder,
Yeah.
and I'd see his light, and I could reorient and row towards it. And I'd do that until I got over along the shore, and then I could go right up the shoreline and trap. But he was a wonderful guy. He would come out. I remember one day, every day he'd go like, well, so I'd hold up the rats I was
cool.
catching, and then one day I held up all the rats, and then I held up a nice buck mink, and he came right out and
That's cool.
down on the dock. I was only, I don't know, 10, 11.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask how old you were.
Yeah. And so, that's where I started, was
Right.
trapping. And, I've really pursued it.
Right.
And I became a good trapper.
So trapping was really your first.
Yeah. And when you live here, you live on venison. So I started hunting very young. And so, I remember the first deer I killed was with a .22.
Oh yeah.
Pouring rain, 10 feet away, it stood up out of a bed. It was a doe,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
shot it and then ran home.
Yeah.
That's great.
How old are you?
I don't know, young.
I mean, nobody cared then.
No, it was so long ago. I mean, if you needed meat, you
Yeah, that was the way. I
Yeah,
guess,
yeah.
Here, right?
we didn't. I was never an outlaw. It's just.
It's what you did. It
Yeah,
was
I
the
mean,
culture.
you had to have some meat,
Right.
and we were we were poor kids, and it was really good to have fresh venison. But
Sure. Yeah.
you know, yeah, I'll never forget. It dropped right in its tracks. I hit it right in the eye, with a 22,
Yeah.
and then I didn't even look at it. I just turned and ran all the way home.
Didn't know what to do
Freaked
with
out
it.
about having
No, it was just I was elated that I got it, but I
yeah.
ran home and said, "Mom, I got a deer."
Yeah.
She's like, "You did what?" And then I had a hard time finding it.
Oh yeah.
It was more than a quarter of a mile, maybe closer, probably 3/8 of a mile from the house,
Yeah.
and no trails. It was just,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and you ought to try to go back at that age and find a deer lane.
Yeah.
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 And eventually, between my brother and I, we found it.
What were the woods like around here then, in the southern Adirondacks? I mean, was it because I look at pictures of when my mother started coming here in the 50s and 60s, and it seems like it was a lot more. It was meadows at that point.
Well,
Was it still
when you were up on the Windfall Road here in Wells, you could look right down the village,
right? So
which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then my mother showed me pictures when she was a kid.
Yeah.
I mean, it was wide open.
yeah,
Really?
Yeah. Everything had been forested off and
right.
planted to crops and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it was raising cattle and
Yeah,
whatever you needed to subsistence farm and live.
right,
But over the years, it definitely has changed.
right.
But I will tell you that when in the late '60s, early '70s, they ran a doe permit in the Adirondacks, and
Right.
it didn't go well because it coincided with 3 or 4 really bad winters,
Yeah.
Right.
and it knocked the deer herd down.
Yeah.
I remember, as a kid, grabbing a rifle and going up on the ranges up in here, and you'd walk all day and not cut a deer track.
Wow.
Yeah, that's rough.
Less. Do you think the population's coming back?
Oh yeah,
now?
I mean,
Yeah. More deer now than when.
well, it's from the '70s. I mean, they were devastated for about 8 or 10 years, maybe not
Right.
quite that long. It seemed like a long time. 5 to 6 years at least, and then when it came back pretty good. In the '80s, there were deer everywhere,
Right.
and I would say in the '80s, I would trap heavily when the fur market was good in the '70s and the '80s.
Right.
I was catching a lot of fur. It was worth a lot of money.
Right.
$110 red fox, $280
No
fisher,
kidding.
Wow.
and mink were over $50 in the '80s, and
Yeah.
beaver were $1 an inch. And you could make some money at it, if you were good at it.
Right.
And so I would spend, the season always opened late October, but I never set a trap until the 1st of November because hides weren't completely prime until, and then, I'd put out a pile of traps, and then usually by the 3rd week of November, the brooks were starting to freeze up, and I would have taken, at that time I was taking 40 mink or more.
Wow.
And, they're worth over $50 a piece. And then I would, you can tell if you're a mink trapper and you know what you're doing. When you start to catch a few more females than you do males, it's time to pull up.
Interesting.
And that I remember one particular year in the '80s, I had 40 mink, 25 males, 15 females. But the last 3 mink I took were females, and I said, okay, time to pull up. And so I did, and then it's like, yeah, because what I would do is I'd spend that first little period of time before I set traps, muzzle load hunt and try to get a nice doe on the ground and maybe a young buck or something. But and then as soon as you're into the 3rd week of November, now I'm
Primed.
primed, and then I'd head back into the woods. Sometimes within 3 or 4 days, I already had my wall tent set up back in the Siamese Ponds Wilderness area, and I'd
Right.
head right back in.
Right.
And usually within 3 or 4 days, I'd kill a nice buck.
About how far back in were you setting up your wall tent?
The first time I set up was all the way back into Siamese. Well, I shouldn't say.
Don't say where, but
Yeah.
it's a big area, so
Yeah.
good luck trying to find Jim's.
About
where he set
6
up.
miles off the road, and then
6 miles in.
yeah, and
Oh,
then
wow.
the next, I think I did that a few years, and then I moved a little closer, still 4.5 from the road.
Right. Okay.
And actually, I could still kind of hunt the same area.
Right.
And then as time went on, I moved a little closer. I think the one spot that I was in for a long time, maybe 20 years, I was in one area. And that was maybe the tent was about 3.5, 4 miles from the road.
Right.
And then, I'd hunt back in from there.
Right.
And I really had two major mountains that, were side by side.
Yep.
That, the better you know the country you hunt, the better hunter you're going to become, because, bucks, they travel the same avenues year after year. The doe groups change because feed changes. And wherever the does are, that's where the bucks are going to be. And
Right.
so, it takes a little scout and get back in there and find out what the does are feeding on. And even if they clean up whatever feed, they stay in that general area.
Right.
I have some questions about that. So can I ask some questions?
Please, yeah.
Okay. So when you were in that area for all that time and you're fine-tuning the area, right? You're scouting and you're hunting and you're getting bucks, and you shoot a buck each year, a good buck each year. Did you ever get the sensation or get the feeling that you're hitting that area too much, or do you feel like, this is a common question we get, did you feel like you were taking too many bucks from one area, or did that ever not occur to you? How did you feel about that?
It's a good question, Mark. I think the older you get, the more conscious you become of these kind of issues. And I do remember a time, I finally, when I moved out of the Siamese Ponds area, it was not because I was too old to haul the stuff in and out. It was a matter of a couple of rough winters, and then the amount of coyote sign and the lack of deer sign was alarming.
Yes.
And I'm hunting on snow, and I come onto a nice track, and I go, that's a buck, and I start to follow it, and within just a few minutes, a coyote track merges onto it.
Yeah.
And it was almost routine, and then, I end up, I'm following a buck, I end up shooting a coyote.
Yeah.
And then on the way out of my wall tent the following day, same thing. I'm walking along the trail. Here comes a coyote, and I happen to know the trail extremely well. And the river and the road parted with each other, but they came back together about 300-400 yards down, and it ran into that patch of woods. So I just took off running, ran all the way to the other end, and sat right down on the trail facing the river, wide open. And I expected him to come right out on my side of the river, but he didn't. He'd crossed the river somehow, but I'm sitting there looking through the scope, and he shows up on the other side of the river and kind of like stopped and looked like, what is that?
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah.
But I said, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
To kill two coyotes when you're hunting bucks,
Yeah.
2 days, 1 day apart. And I said, you know what? This is the last year in here for a while.
You want to give them a chance.
Yeah, I wanted to let things recuperate.
Yeah.
It has, because, I immediately switched over to another wilderness area, and a lot more sign, and fewer coyotes at that point. Just randomly, that's what I came upon, and so I ended up hunting in that area, and a few years later, I went back in the Siamese. I was still pretty young. I could day hunt back in that country.
Yeah.
And I'd leave the trailhead, in the dark. I'd walk 2 hours in the dark, and
Sure.
I'd climb up on the mountain. I'd be just about up where I wanted to be when the sun was rising.
Yeah.
And ended up killing a couple more nice bucks in there,
Yeah.
Now I've probably passed that point, for me to walk 4 or 5 miles in the dark on the way in and hunt all day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just old enough that it's not happening,
Yeah.
I can still cover 10 miles, but I know I've done something.
It's painful.
Yeah. Jim is being humble, by the way. He killed a big buck this year, so he's getting it done, despite whatever physical limitations you have. And Jim is a cancer survivor too, on top of it, which is inspiring when I think about how lazy I am sometimes, and how Jim does it. It's impressive.
Hi everyone, team member Mark Sharon here. A lot of you know that I've been coaching people with addictions for more than 36 years. Well, today we have an exciting announcement to make. While Michelle and I will continue to personally coach people as we always have, we are now providing a training course for those of you out there who might want to become a certified Freedom Model coach. This new coaching certification course is available to those with established coaching practices, those who are psychologists or psychiatrists or therapists, or anyone who is looking to get into the field of helping people with addictions to solve their problem for good. If you would like to get on the applicant list, email me directly at info@thefreedommodel.org. Again, here's that email address, info@thefreedommodel.org. We look forward to your interest and potential of working together to change the way people across the world are helped with addictions. Take care.
So your style, we've discussed in the past, you do tracking, still hunting, and sitting, depending on the circumstance. How did you develop your style?
Well, when I was young, there weren't a bunch of styles for me. It was still hunting, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Never been a sitter. I just always had to see what was over the next rise.
Yeah.
You know, if you spend a lot of time on your feet chasing whitetails, you're either going to get good at it or you're going to give up on it.
That's right. That's right.
And so, you know, the deer teach you.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Sure do.
you know, I've had some, you know, at this point, it's such an enjoyable thing because I'll just give you an example. You know, this was probably even 8 or 9 years ago. I was back in, you know, Maine has got a unique situation. They have the logging roads that go everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
You can drive the logging roads and find a good track and then get on it.
Right.
Here, it's all shoe leather.
Yeah.
So, you know, I went into an area that I knew was decent and I started, you know, just rambling, looking for a track. I covered 3.5 miles and didn't cut a single whitetail track on a fresh snow, you know.
Yeah.
And then, boom, oh, here's a track. I get up to it, I looked it over, said, I think it's a young buck. You know, nothing unique about the size of the track. You know, it'd be like a mature doe, but, you know, looking at the way he walked, and then, you know, I followed a little ways. I said, you know, oftentimes one deer will lead you to other deer. So I said, hey, it's the only track I've cut. Let's follow it, you know. So I followed a little ways, and then I said, yeah, it's a buck, you know. You know, when a buck urinates, you know what you're looking at. And, you know, they walk with a little different style. You know, a doe puts one foot in front of the other. And, you know, like you'd expect a female, it's a little more dainty stroll. And a buck is, even a young buck, he likes to try to imitate the big boys, and they swagger a little bit, and they're just a little different in the way they walk. And then when I saw that he urinated, I go, yeah, it's a buck, you know. And so I said, well, I'll follow him, see if he brings me to something else, you know. So I think I followed him about a mile, and then he worked his way into an area, and I said, his track's changing. Let me look carefully at what he's doing. And what he was doing was feeding. You know, he's just
Nipping.
Yeah, he's nipping, just browsing a little bit, you know, and you know the track totally changes because you know he stopped for just a moment, and you know you guys know you're hunters, so he nipped a lot of stuff, and I said he's going to bed down, you know, because as you know they don't eat too much and they got to lay down.
Yep.
And so I followed him, and then he broke out of this thicker stuff and opened up into this hardwood section, and I know the mountain really well in there, and there's one little spot. It's very steep. We're just above that steep section. It was open hardwood, and there's one like bowl. It goes down very steeply, but it's all open hardwood. And then to the left, it's really steep. It's all ledgy. And this buck just turned and angled right down that big open hardwood basin. And, you know, I got to the edge of it, I looked down, his track kind of went straight down, then angled to the left, and I just smiled to myself, and I said, I know just where he's going. I said, that buck is not going down in that hardwood. He's setting down a backtrack.
That's right.
And I said, he's going to go down, and he's going to make a big hook, and he's going to come right up into these ledges to my left.
That's right.
And so, you know, I just put the death creep on, you know.
Yeah.
I left his track entirely because he's going to bed up there. He's going to look down.
That's right.
Yeah.
And watch his backtrack. And, you know, he sees a coyote or man show up.
Yeah.
Over there he goes. So I just started just creeping.
And so you went around, you got off his track and went around?
Yeah, just left his track entirely.
Yeah.
I've got the ledges to my left, and I know exactly where I think in my mind he's headed.
Sure.
And so I just work my way till I'm about on the same plane with most of the way up those ledges there, and I just start really, really slow.
So how much ground did you cover before you got to where he'd bedded down?
I think it was about, I think he was bedded down within 100 yards or maybe a little further.
Oh, really?
You know, he made a bigger loop than that, but where he came up in, it may have been 200 yards, but, you know, you don't cover 200 yards in a death creep very quickly.
Right.
It's forever.
How long did it take you?
I don't know. You know, if you're still hunting correctly, time is the last thing you even think about.
That's right.
Right.
I can't really, I don't look at a watch. You know, still hunting is an art, and you actually kind of become
Yes.
part of the environment that's around you.
Yeah.
Wow.
You have to be.
That's right.
And then, you know, when you start to see smaller animals and critters that aren't
Your game.
blowing
right.
you know, yelling, and, you know, the squirrels, the blue jays,
That's a great
and
point.
they just become,
That's a great point.
you become part of
Yes.
the surroundings, you know. So, you know, I was just in that mode.
Yeah.
You know, you're just watching everything out in front of you.
That's the best.
Yeah, and then, you know, I came around a little bit of a bend, and, you know, oftentimes the coat of a whitetail
Yeah.
would get a little flash of sheen from it.
That's right.
You know, just the way the sun or whatever's hitting. And I caught a little flash. I said, you know, you don't move. I mean, you just stay where you are. And then, you know, you just study the area that you thought you saw it. And I'm like, I didn't see anything, but I said, there's something there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, I pushed forward a little bit. And then I think I only covered about 20 more feet. And it was like, I just smiled and said, there he is.
Yeah.
Here's this buck, and he's perched up in these ledges. And,
That's the best.
and he's got his head up, and he's looking right down where his backtrack had run across.
Yeah.
And, you know,
I'm there right now.
and I couldn't,
All the audience is
incredible
like,
I
I'm
couldn't
there.
Storyteller, Jim.
Yeah.
couldn't tell, you know, is this a spike, a crotch? What is it? It's got horn, you know.
Yeah.
A fair amount on its head, you know. So I, you know, just surveying everything around me, and I said, if I just kind of shift to my right a little bit, I have a pretty good sized tree between me and him. And I said, I can, and it was about 15 feet in front of me. So I just slowly, you know, you just unperceptible movement, just move your whole body until I'm pretty much behind that tree. And then you don't change your gait. It's just methodical, very, very slow. Just move forward. And then, you know, come up alongside of this tree, and he's still looking down over the slope. And I slowly brought my rifle up and rested it right on the side of it. And safety's off. I'm looking through the scope, and I can see he's a very nice crotch horn. You know, a foot off his head. Nice looking rack.
Yeah.
And he has no idea I'm there, you know.
Yeah.
And so I was just enjoying it, you know. I'm just watching him through the scope.
Yeah.
And next thing I know, a little breeze. And it swirls around and blows right at the back of my neck. And pretty good breeze.
Yeah.
And blew in that direction. I just smiled to myself. I said, this will be good.
Yeah.
Right.
And it only took about 5 seconds, and he stood right up,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
looking
Yeah.
all around, you know.
Danger.
Yeah, danger. And, you know, he's looking right over my direction.
Right.
And then, you know, his head's moving back and forth. And then he kind of stopped and looked right towards me, you know. And I'm like this, and I just waved to him.
Yeah.
Brought my arm up and went like that. He was like a torpedo down off the mountain, you know.
That's cool.
And for me, I mean, that's a wonderful day of hunting.
Well, that's a win.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Just
a
got the
win.
buck,
Yeah.
right?
You know, I don't care what guys will tell you. You can walk up on a whitetail buck in his bed,
Doing something right.
you're doing something right. And so, you know, you don't have to kill something when you're out there.
Yeah.
I was looking for something bigger than that.
Yeah.
But I was thrilled to have
Yeah.
walked
Yeah.
up on him, you know.
That's awesome.
Other days, I remember walking up on the doe in the pouring rain back in the Siamese country. I mean, walking up on her. I mean, I walked right along. I step out from behind a boulder, and laying at my feet, Brian, from me to you, is a doe, bedded down, and I've stepped right in front of her. And, you know, I look, and it's like she's staring at me, and in slow motion, she starts to stand up with back end first.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. I can still picture it. You know, their fur or their hair is so water resistant.
Right.
Yeah.
That as she's standing up, rear end first, the beads of water are just pouring down off of her.
Yeah.
You know, and I can still picture it in my mind. I mean, it's just like, and we're locked eye to eye, you know, and she just finally fully stood up right in front of me. Like, what do I do? You know, do I run or whatever?
Yeah.
And, you know, as soon as I stepped around, I didn't have room to put a rifle up. It would have touched her. It was that close.
Right.
You know, I got the rifle here, and, you know, she's just staring at me, eyeball to eyeball. And I'm thinking in my mind, maybe there's a buck right here, bedded somewhere that I don't see, you know. I don't want her to blow and run.
Yeah.
I just, you know, I don't know how long we were locked eyes, maybe 10, 15 seconds. I don't know. And then I just went, go on.
Yeah. Right.
And she just, it was like the look at me changed, like, I guess he's no threat.
Yeah.
And then she just turned and trotted away. Stopped right at the edge of where the bench fell off and looked back at me and then trotted off.
Yeah.
And, you know, it made my day.
Yeah, that's magic.
I mean, it's magic.
magical.
You know,
That's
those kind of
magical.
things are incredible,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And you never forget it.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons we hunt.
Yeah.
Isn't it remarkable? I often think of this, how you have this goal to see this strange animal. When you kind of step back, you look at this strange but beautiful animal. But some people may just see them as just an animal, you know? And what we go through in the pursuit of them. And my youngest son, as he was learning to hunt, me and my other son were talking, and I said, you know, what is it about it? And he goes, Dad, it's the expectation. It builds this whole meaning into it. And I said, that's pretty profound, Joe. You know what I mean? He's like, but you build this whole thing in your head. And then sometimes it plays out, but most of the time it doesn't, but you're just waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And it just builds and builds and builds. And then when you see it, it's like magic. And I was like, that is like the most perfect rendition of what happened.
It is. And, you know, sometimes first off, I want to say, after pursuing whitetails for over 50 years, longer than that, but almost 60 years, hard to believe, but, you know, high 50s. They have become so precious to me. I think they're the most beautiful animal in the world.
I agree.
You know, whitetails are
Incredible.
They're an incredible animal. To have a doe next to you is an unbelievable thing.
Yeah, it's an honor.
Yeah, it is. It's incredible. And then, you know, as we do this, you know, we want to be the best hunters we can. And then we oftentimes play a scenario in our mind and hope that we're doing the right thing and it's going to play out. And when it happens, it's magic, you know. Yeah. And I remember I had there was an area, it was back in the Siamese area that I hunted for years. And I was day hunting in there at this particular time. I had a wall tent in there, but, you got work and you got stuff going on. And and I said, I got to get in there. You know, I had checked the area out. There was 2 or 3 big scrapes. It was relatively, was early, mid-November, but, the rut was just, every year's a little bit different, and the rut was just a little bit later than normal. And so I said, I got to get in there, So I went in the dark. I got most of the way up. There was an area that I was going to still hunt through and then find a place up in there to sit for a little while, and then I was going to still hunt another section that I like in there. And so there's one little patch of softwood. You come up a bench, and then there's one more little bench, and then there were 2 scrapes on this bench, and then you go up another spot, and that's kind of it's not the top, but there's a notch right there. There's a small hill, and then there's a bigger part of the mountain to the right of it, and there's a notch between them, and that area is always good. You know how notches
Oh,
are.
yeah.
They love to come through there. So at any rate, I'm in the patch of softwood. It's only about 50 feet through, and I'm just working my way where I can't see beyond it into the hardwood, and I hear going, you got to be joking me. There's a deer coming down right. I know the scrape it's not 100 feet from me on the other side of this patch of balsam. And I hear the deer come down, working the scrape. I'm going, and contrary to what people might think, bucks aren't the only ones that work a scrape.
That's true.
Those that work them too.
That's right.
But I'm thinking in my mind, it's probably a buck.
Of course you're thinking that.
Yeah.
Mark calls those buck rooms, by the way. I love that term. It's just a little patch of softwood. And
Everybody kind of busts my chops about it, but
Yeah.
I think it's great.
yeah, that's what I call it.
So anyways, I have to stand right where I am, and then I hear him turn after he works the scrape, and he's working off to the left. I hear him going. I'm going, well, if he continues right on that bench, I'm going to get one little glimpse of him before he goes out of sight, and I'll be able to tell at least whether it was a buck or doe. It was pretty thick, and there's no way I can get a shot out of the stuff I'm in. And then I see him, and he's got his head down forward, and I can't see. And then all of a sudden, he just enough up as he went out of sight to see that, he was turning left, and he was going to drop right off the bench that we were both on to the bench that I just came off of. Okay. So I thought to myself, he's a buck, decent rack buck.
Yeah.
I'll just turn around. I'll just drop back down onto this bench, just enough so I can see onto that bench, and wait a few minutes. If he decides to come around the mountain on that bench this way, he'll come right to me. So I went down and waited probably a half an hour. He didn't show up. I said, hey, he'd have come by now if he was coming this way. He's probably turned and followed that bench going around the mountain the other way. So I said, okay. So I turned back around, go right up through, look at where he was in the scrape. Then I go up, there's another scrape, check that out. And then I get all the way to the top, right where the notch is, and I catch movement. And I look, and here comes a doe with a fawn behind it. And they're going to come right down past me. And I said, the wind is blowing diagonally this way. And I said, once they get into the wind tunnel, I'm had.
Yeah.
So, they're coming towards me. And I would say when they were about 20 yards, maybe a little closer than that, I'm thinking, it's just about over now. And she stops. And you can tell, she knows something is up, Big dominant doe. She just stopped, raised her head up, and is looking around. Well, right at that instant, her fawn comes right up, shoves his nose right up under her tail. And she violently spins and kicks at him, peeled her ears right back,
Yeah.
Went right after him, and he ran about 30, 40 feet off, And it was very clear. I just smiled to myself, and I said, she is in heat, and her fawn is a buck.
Yeah.
And I said, that just told me everything I need to know.
Yeah.
And then rather than come right down past me through the notch, she turned and went right up onto the big part of the mountain, but she never blew, and she forgot about whatever was bothering her, which was probably getting a little wind of me. But the little one coming up her backside
Distracted.
Reset her. Yeah.
So then she turned and she went up the mountain, and the little one just stayed back 30, 40 feet and followed Mama up the hill. And I said, Jim, you couldn't be in a better spot.
Yeah,
This is perfect,
Yeah.
And I've got my eyes fixed right on where she first appeared, I looked to my left, there's a rock sitting about that high, And I just
Nice little seat.
shifted over, sat down on it, and I carry a little pad to rest your butt. If you're going to sit any length of time, you better have something under your butt, or you're going to be shifting around. Deer are going to see you, So anyways, I sat right down. I put my elbows in my knees, put my eye down in the scope, said, perfect. All I got to do if a deer shows up is just drop my eye on the scope. And I said, that buck's going to go around that mountain. He's going to hit her backtrack there, and he's going to come running. So I looked at my watch, and 1 hour and 10 minutes went by, and I'm just staring at the same spot, and he appeared out of nowhere, head down to the ground coming, and all I did was just drop my eye into the scope, boom.
Wow.
Dropped him right in his tracks. I thought, yes.
Yeah.
You build this whole hunt in your mind, and then
Narrative,
it
yeah.
comes true right in front of you.
That's amazing.
And I thought, fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's really reading the situation.
Yeah.
And the deer was teaching you. That's just another way that they teach you. And
Yeah.
it is really special when you have a narrative and it plays out, because that's so rare.
Yeah.
That's so rare, because there's so many variables.
Yeah. And honestly, Mark, I've had it. The longer you do it and the more bucks you shoot, the more of these type of things come true.
Yes.
They work,
Yeah. Yeah.
I knew I had this one buck. He was bedded on the backside of this mountain. And boy, every time his track would go in here, and you couldn't get near him. It seemed like,
Yeah.
And I was waiting for just a little bit of snow or something to cover my noise, And that night I came home, and I had this buck on my mind. Once you find a really big track, and I wanted to get this buck, and so I listened to the weather forecast, and it said going to snow about 2 inches tonight. I said, great, So I get up 3 o'clock in the morning, look out, no snow, And I said, well, that doesn't mean anything. This was a bit north, half-hour drive further north and higher in elevation.
Right.
But I've got a buddy that was in charge of the roads for Hamilton County.
Right.
And I knew Kenny'd be up. So I just, who else can you call at 3:30 in the morning?
Yeah.
Snow report.
Kenny, what do you got for snow? He said, it's about 1.5 inches, 2 inches. Thanks.
Perfect.
Nice.
He knew just what I was heading for. So,
Nice.
I just jumped in the truck and went right up, hiked in the dark. I get up on this ridge. It's still dark out, and but the wind was blowing. I could not drop down and start hunting the backside because it was in the wrong direction. It would have been blowing my scent right to him. So I said, okay, hike the top of this ridge all the way up to the top, and then cut across the top, and then you'll have the wind in your face diagonally, and just drop down over the top of the mountain and work right back through that. It was a mixture of softwood, hardwood, and some big hemlock in the mix. But a lot of short balsam fir.
That's great.
And a mix of pretty good sized hardwood in with it, but just a great area for a buck to bed.
Yeah.
And pretty thick,
Yeah.
And what I would do is, it was windy, very windy, and I would only move when the wind would blow. I'd just move a little bit. When the wind would stop, I would stop. And, you're watching everything. And if you're expecting to find a buck in his bed, you better be looking at everything. And everything twice or 3 times. And,
That's right.
And then, the wind would blow. It was blowing really strong, and I'd move. I'd just pussyfoot with a move, maybe 20, 30 feet, sometimes a little further, just depending on how much wind. But, if you broke into another section to look at,
Right.
then you stop.
Another room.
Right.
Yeah, it's another room to check. And
Yeah.
so, I was doing that maybe, I'm just guessing, an hour, just working my way along, and wind blew, and I moved up only about 15 feet, stepped around a small balsam, looked down the slope, and here's this big boy bedded down. He's got a screen of balsam in front of him and a couple kind of behind him, but I got a perfect shot at him. He's maybe, he's bedded right down in a ball, head erect and looking right down the slope. And, I don't have anything to rest a gun on, but I just squatted so that my elbows were onto my knees.
How far was he?
I want to say 40 yards,
Oh, wow.
35.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And
You were right on him.
and I put just right down on him, probably 40 yards,
Yep.
and shot. And he thrashed, and I levered in another round, put it right on him. Boom.
And this is with the 358
Oh, yeah.
Winchester?
Yep.
I want the audience
Yeah,
to hear that.
Yeah.
Great gun.
yeah, it's a fantastic round, and I can't see myself hunting with anything else. But took him right in his bed, and that's a great feeling.
Oh, that's the pinnacle right there.
Big mature bucks. That 10-pointer in the corner. When I killed him, I said he's not the biggest 10-pointer. My buddy Gary McGinn said, There are no small 10-pointers, Jim.
Yeah.
But I mounted him. I mounted that buck myself with some guidance from my buddy Bob Penji, who's a taxidermist. But I mounted it because that was the first buck I'd walked up to and killed in his bed.
Yes.
And, same idea.
That's a good one.
What year would that have been, Jim?
That would have been 90. I think about 90.
90? Yeah.
So what's that, 35 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that buck, same thing. I walked in the dark, right on top of the mountain, started pussyfooting along just over the ridge, and just working my way along, looking at everything, and caught that 10-pointer bedded down with his head up, looking down the mountain, and was able to very slowly sit down, put my elbows on my knees, and just settle right in tight. And boom.
Yeah.
Done.
So go ahead. You were going to ask something.
Well, I'm curious. One of the things we talk about is people's journeys to develop their style, and you'd mentioned still hunting is an art. And by the way, as a quick aside, Jim recommended a book to me a few years ago, Trails of Enchantment by Paul Brandreth, which is really Pauline Brandreth, which is a fantastic book. If you can find it, it's pretty rare, but I think you would described it as the book on still hunting.
Yeah, they consider the book to be the blue chip whitetail book.
Yeah, it's a fantastic
I mean,
book.
it's just a really good book. I love the way she approaches everything.
Yeah.
And at the time that it was written, when I first read it, I thought it was a man.
Yeah, right, because I guess it would have been uncouth for a woman to write about hunting then.
Right. I think they figured that nobody would read it.
Right.
That's interesting.
But I thought her approach and her thoughtfulness was very unique.
Right.
And once I found out it was a female, I said that's why it was really unique.
Yeah.
And it was refreshing, and
and it captures the poetry in a way that I think you do too of the hunt.
Yeah, I really love the way it was put together. Maybe if I had been a young hunter and read it, it wouldn't have had the same. I wouldn't have had the same take.
Yeah.
But as somebody that had been hunting for a very long time,
right.
What a book! I go back to it often and just read sections of it because I enjoyed it.
It's so good. It's hard to overstate how good it is. But I wanted to ask that as part of this question, which is how your journey perhaps to developing your style. And I know drives are a popular method in the Southern Adirondacks. Did you
never liked it? Never got involved in it.
No kidding. Okay.
Don't like it.
I don't like them either.
I'm a guy. I want one-on-one with a buck.
Yeah.
And I'm not interested in. And I'm not saying that every deer drive that the deer are running like crazy when they get to you.
Right.
They're not. Sometimes they come walking right to you, I'm sure. But,
right.
For me, no, I want one-on-one with a whitetail. I want to just go and get them,
Yeah, we feel the same way.
And so it's just what I've always done. And, it takes a long time. I mean, first few years.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't want you to think that I've killed massive amounts of, huge whitetails. I mean, I've killed my fair share of young bucks too. I guess I'd call it a collage, Lori told you that I've been given the living room and I can't have anything else, but I'll show you what I have in the bedroom because she just said, but anyways, I have a collage of 7-pointers and smaller,
Yeah, right.
just bucks,
Yeah.
So,
but what I did was I just took a 1x10 or 12 and screwed it at the top of an armoire in the bedroom.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Which is pretty wide. It's maybe 50 inches wide or something.
Right.
And then took racks that had some horn on them and screwed them, the skull plates, to the 1x12.
Nice.
In a row, and then just start placing other skull plates in, and they would hook into the horns of the others, and then just can build off of it.
That's cool. Yeah,
And,
I gotta get a picture of that. That sounds really cool.
It's just, there's $50 there.
That's cool.
Just there, and a lot of them are spikes, crotches, 3s, 5s.
I'm so glad you said that because people nowadays, I'm so glad you said that. I have in my office, a wall of big bucks, but it's 2/3 small bucks. And then I interspersed all the bigger ones in there because there's stories. People are like, why do you have that in your office with the big ones? I go, are you serious? Like,
they all have a story, Mark.
Oh my God.
And not only that, Mark, you killed an Adirondack buck.
Yeah.
I think we do young hunters a disservice.
I agree.
When we push them towards, you got to have a big, massive buck, and everybody's scoring and trying to find it. That's all well and good, but don't ever belittle a young man taking a nice spike or a crotch horn. You still hunt up on an Adirondack buck and kill him. To me, that's a trophy, and for a kid should not be told that's not something to be proud of doing.
And it sacrificed its life.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
honor it.
That's not a small thing.
No, it's not a small thing. And, every single buck I've taken, the first thing sometimes it's if it's a massive buck, I shout it right out, "Thank you, Lord." And God brings these bucks to us. I mean, it's a sacred thing.
Yeah.
I know, Brian, that you've read the story of Old Square Toes.
Sure. Yep.
But I would tell you that buck, I hunted him 4 years.
Yep.
And when I killed him, I mean, I was elated.
Yep.
And I was filled with deep remorse.
Yeah, because of the travel for so long.
Yeah, you know what? It's a magnificent buck that I finally anchored, but I took his life, and it's like
it's over.
It's over.
Yeah.
And I spent countless hours trying to outsmart that buck. 4 years is a long time to hunt a buck, and there were other bucks I could have shot, and I wanted him. And I had trees he'd hit that were a foot in diameter.
Yeah.
And his track was right there in the snow. I know it was him, because it was rocky country and he was old.
Yeah.
The hoofs were squared right off.
Right.
And they looked so odd. I mean, you could spot him.
Right.
So can
I'll just quickly say for the viewers, that's in Wide Racks and Tall Tines.
Tall Tales, yeah. Wide Racks
Tails,
and Tall
excuse
Tales.
me. I always, it's a great title because it is a bit of a wordplay. So I hope Mr. Green doesn't mind, but I'll put this PDF up along with this so you guys can read the story. But it's fantastic, and Jim is as good a writer as he is a storyteller. So I'll put that up on the page for everybody to read.
So I have a question about that buck, because that's I didn't read the article, so I don't know. Maybe it's in the article, but this idea of hunting one buck in the big woods is new for me, because I did have one buck that I had an experience, 162 inch that I had as sheds, and I had all these experiences with the buck. And it ended up being a 2-year odyssey for me, but then he disappeared, and then I got disinterested and I moved on. It was part of my learning years.
Sure.
I went dry for 9 years, and then all of a sudden success tumbled into me, and I've been successful ever since. But this idea of a buck being in an area or whatever, do you find that buck in particular was more of a homebody? Or do you think that they all are and are trackable that way?
I think they're all homebodies until the rut is on, and then they can, they explode and they can be gone. So, they go from doe group to doe group. And this guy's home range, I had his core area pretty well known.
Okay, so that's an early season.
That's an early season.
And a late season? Did he tend to go back there late season?
So I killed him December 2nd.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
And I knew the rut was over for the most part. And I said, maybe he'll be back in his home range. And, I hiked in the dark to get in here. There was about 1.5 inches of snow, and it was crunchy. It was noisy as can be. But I said, my buddy Bob Penji said, hey, we're going to hunt. You want to go with us? And I said, Bob, I got an appointment with this buck. I got to go to this one spot, So I went in the dark and went back in, and I ended up, killing the buck. And then I dragged him all the way out because, I don't do that. Normally I debone the whole deer.
Pack them out.
And put it in those 2.5 gallon Ziplocs and carry them out. And
Right.
To this day, I think I've taken out 40-some bucks in Ziploc bags. Mm-hmm. And the first one I cut the horns out of. After that, I said, no way, I cheated myself. I cape the whole head and leave it all intact. I cape the cape forward and leave the head together and wrap it around my neck and carry it out with flagging on it so nobody shoots at me. But I'm like a little kid. All these bucks they're taking, and it never gets old. And I have I'll show you guys later, but my woodshed's attached to the house, and I have a glass window in the door. And then outside that, you drop down on a set of stairs, but right there I have a shelf. And my buckhead goes on the shelf. And, after you kill a nice buck, probably 7 or 8 times an evening, I'll just walk over and flip the light on and go, oh, it's a nice buck.
Yeah, that's the best.
You know what? It's the greatest feeling when you connect. This is hard work.
Yeah.
I think one of the best traits you could ever have as a whitetail hunter is perseverance, and you just have to work at it and learn the woods. I know that today the big rage is GPSs, and it makes it so guys can go anywhere, but I think there's a lot of bucks missed with a nose and a GPS and fooling with that stuff and all the technology and all that. And, get comfortable in the woods.
Yes.
Don't be having to rely on a GPS and where am I and all that. Get to a point where, you got a map and a compass with you, and if you need it, you got it. But just get back in and follow those bucks. They'll teach you a lot. But if you're constantly worried about where am I and what am I doing, and you're going to miss a lot of stuff.
I think that's really true. I think that there's I love having onX to get in and out quickly and avoid that swamp or that one swale that you forgot about, and then we call it getting swamp locked, and you're like, it's dark and you're like, why am I in here? So
if you look at your map though, Mark, you can see where that swamp is.
I know, but I think that it's I love onX for that kind of stuff, but I agree with you. I'll go with a younger hunter, and boy, are they attached to the phone. I'm like, dude, put that away.
Yeah.
I confess that is me. And it's one of the things that's striking about talking to you, Jim, is that you really learn a mountain. And I think that's interesting. And I suffer from I just am generally like a hyper person, I think, especially when it comes to hunting. And I run through the woods way too fast. And I've shared some of these difficulties with you and relied on your advice. But so in those days when you spent 20 years at that spot in Siamese where you were camping, would you do day hunts in other spots? Did you have
somewhat? But there were 2 mountains, and when I say 2 mountains, I'm talking there's a big area.
Yeah, you're talking massive.
Yeah, big massive area.
Yeah.
And then there were times where I would skip across the river and go to another pair of mountains that I hunted when I had my tent further in. But most of it, I mean, if you know an area really well, and you've done your homework, you know where the doe groups are, and you've seen a whole lot of buck sign, why would you go anywhere else?
Yeah. I mean, in just those 2 or 3 stories you just told us, one of the takeaways was that you were able to anticipate what the buck was going to do, and you were correct.
Yes.
Which is everything if you know the mountain, I think.
Makes a huge difference. And, understanding whitetails and how they react to everything is huge.
Right.
The other thing about that is this is going to sound so strange, but a mountain becomes your friend. The land becomes your friend. When you get to know a mountain, I almost talk to the land. I'm like, oh, I know where I am. And you have this weird connection, and there's all kinds of meaning it gives to you. Like there's a certain area in the eastern Adirondacks that I started hunting years ago. And I haven't shot a buck there, but I've had a ton of experiences there. But I keep going back there because it reminds me there are these weird rolling sections with oaks that reminds me, and it smells like where I was as a kid. And that place
It's magical.
Is deeply magical. And you get a warm, sunny day, and I go in, I go to sleep.
Yeah,
I'll go in and I'll just go sleep.
Naps.
Oh,
I won't lie.
It is magical. So when you get to know a place like that, it's like, yeah, you're talking to the land. I don't know how to explain it.
I have 3 or 4 mountains that they're very, very special to me, and sometimes I just go there, in the off season and just climb it.
Yeah.
Just to enjoy it, and it's like going and visiting an old friend.
Yes.
And,
And you're not lonely there, but you're alone.
It's just,
yeah.
It's just fantastic.
Yep.
And I have that attachment to the, I won't mention the name of the mountains, but there's one in particular back in the Siamese area that I hunted in, I know everything about it,
Yeah.
And, my son, he wanted to go when he was 10, so I would take him, and too young to buck hunt, but wanted to be with Dad,
Yeah.
And so I taught him to read a map in
Yes.
there.
Yes.
And, we'd just be going along, and I'd just stop and say, Daniel, there's a feature very near to us that you should be able to open your map and point right to it and tell me exactly where we are. He looked at me like, what? And I go, Daniel, you know how to read a contour map. You know everything about it. I want you to get your map out. What ridge are we on? He'd say, well, we're on the East Ridge, Dad. Yep. How far along? I don't know, but get your map out. Let's look at it. And you tell me there's a feature right here. And then, he'd look around, and then I can see the light bulb starting to go off, and then he's looking at his map, and it's just like, his eyes brightened. Dad,
Yeah.
we're right there.
Yes.
He had it pinned. Just to our left and a little further up was the mountain got really steep, and there's a waterfalls. Dropped about 40 feet, 35 feet. And the contour lines, of course, they turn sharply, and they go uphill right there. And they come right together, so it's all dark brown,
Yeah. Yeah.
And man, and then from that was like a turning point for Daniel. And he became... and I would constantly say, okay, where are we? And he'd go, right there, Dad, because now he's aware, and he's actually working his way through the woods like his father does,
Yes.
knowing where you are by what you're seeing,
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there's a super value to a map.
Yeah, oh yeah.
That other things can't.
They can't replace it.
Because once you take that paper representation
And make it into a mountain in your mind, because you understand
Yes.
contour lines.
all of a sudden, like the earth shifts in your mind, and and it orientates you, and it's a wild process how your mind can do that.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. And so
Yeah.
Daniel, when he was in the service, he was in Special Forces, they called him the human map.
That's cool. Yeah.
What was really cool was I'd go down for his graduation from the Special Forces stuff, and he'd go, oh, Dad, I want you to meet these guys. They were instructors and whatever, I go, this is my dad. And the guys were going, this is the guy, man.
Yeah. That's funny. You're a legend even among
Because,
special
they
forces guys.
they would ask Daniel, where'd you learn this stuff? Well, my dad taught me,
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
So how did you curious just how you got hooked up with Del Green or some of the other
He
writers
called
who've written
me.
about you? Yeah.
He was doing a book on whitetail hunters, and he called me on the phone one night and he said, hey, I got your number from so-and-so. He said, I talked to a dozen hunters that they said, hey, have you talked to Jim Abbott over in Wells?
Yeah. Not surprised.
And they said, no. And he said, so, you get that many guys saying that, I better
Yeah.
get on the phone and try to reach it. He told me what he was doing.
Yeah.
And he said, just give me an idea what you want, and I'll form it into a story. Well, I've written articles for Fur Fish and Game, and I like to organize my thoughts and write it and then rewrite it and whatever. And so I sent him that article, and he didn't have to touch it. He just said, no, it's so well written. I just put it in just the way you wrote it.
That's
which,
cool.
That is
which is
fantastic.
nice. I can't say the same for Fur Fish and Game. They got to edit everything. I say
Sometimes
my
they do.
grandfather, they got to put in my maternal grandfather. It's like, who cares? But that's the way it is. If you're an editor, I guess you got to do something to earn your pay.
There you go.
Make
Funny.
work. Yeah.
I want to take a quick break just so I can make sure everything's recorded right. I get
Yeah,
paranoid.
sure.
So
Yes.
let's do that. This podcast is brought to you in part by Minus 33. Minus 33 is a wool and textile manufacturer based in New Hampshire that is producing top-notch merino wool base layers and socks. Layering your clothes when you're hunting the big woods is key. As we've discussed on the podcast, the conditions and distances involved in hunting the Adirondacks mean that you have to take your gear seriously. You can't afford to not have the best gear. And that's particularly true of your base layers. Minus 33 long johns should be an essential part of your gear system to keep you warm while you're out in the Adirondack backcountry. As for socks, I've tried dozens of pairs of wool socks over the years, and Minus 33 Heritage socks are by far the comfiest. If you go on the Minus 33 website, you can read about the care that they've taken to create these socks. And once you put them on, the difference is obvious. They are perfect for long days hoofing it up and down mountains in the Dacks. So get prepped for the next season now by clicking on the link in the description and getting stocked up on minus 33 merino base layers and socks. Happy hunting. Hi, Brian Connor, host of the Adirondack Hunt Podcast here. We're excited to announce our partnership with the most respected and recognized land company in the Northeast, Christmas and Associates Land Company. Owners Dan and Mark Christmas are two upstate New York natives with deep roots in the Adirondacks and Tug Hill Plateau, as well as two of the best big woods hunters you'll meet. Whether it's a newly constructed camp surrounded by state wilderness or a comfortable family getaway, their team of experienced land guides are the best at matching folks with the perfect land track at an affordable price and a simple, easy process. They even provide financing. Christmas Land Guides will provide full land tours using ATVs, snowmobiles, and even snowshoes so that you can scout every acre of your property. In addition to finding just the right tract, Christmas Land and Camp staff can help you construct the camp you've always dreamed of using our in-house master builders. Every camp is overbuilt, carefully located, and rock solid. Whether you're a first-time buyer or an experienced landowner, Mark, Dan, and all the land and camp staff will strive to make your search a quality, once-in-a-lifetime experience. For over 30 years, no one in New York State has provided more big-buck properties and family hunting camps to hundreds of folks who love the woods than Christmas and Associates Land Company. Dan, Mark, and the rest of the Christmas family remain dedicated to wise land conservation and treating everyone they meet like family. Always available 7 days per week, unless there's fresh tracking snow. Contact Land and Camps by calling 1-800-229-7843 or visit them on Facebook or go to landandcamps.com. Hey everyone, Brian Connor here. I want to tell you about performance shooting in Constable, New York. Contact owner Mike McDonald for any of your rifle or ammunition needs. When calling, use the code BWB for discounts for new buyers and ask about their Browning BAR custom carbines while you're at it. Call Mike at 518-483-5241 and get your season started now. With over 100 years of combined experience, Hardee's Electric can satisfy any electric need you may have. Based out of Amsterdam, New York, Hardee's will work on projects big and small, commercial, residential, and industrial. If you have electric work you need done, go to the experts at Hardee's Electric. Call 518-842-1074. All right, we just took a quick break. We're back now. So, Mark, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so we usually do a segment with everybody, and that is about equipment, what they prefer. And Jim and I are gun enthusiasts.
Yes, we are, for sure.
Yeah, and he has a very unique gun, and I'm going to let him talk about it and why he prefers it.
Well, I'm left-handed for one thing.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I did build a left-handed bolt action years ago, but I'm a big fan of lever actions.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, because I'm left-handed.
Yep.
Years ago, the only left-handed gun you could get was a Model 700 Remington, and they only made it in 270, 30-06, and 7mm mag.
That's right.
And they were in the BDL with that bright glossy stock on it, and I didn't want that. And I wasn't thrilled. And it's not that there's anything wrong with any of those calibers, but they weren't me. And so I decided to make one. I don't do any of the metal work, but I bought a left-handed action from McGowan.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Remington left-handed action. He told me, no, we buy 75 left-handed and 1,000 right-handed every year. And,
All right.
And he said, we can mate it to whatever you want. And I said, a light sporter barrel and 280 rem.
Oh, that's a good one.
And so that's what we did. And then I built the stock. I actually was able to, I had a good friend who had worked for Remington. And when he retired, he became what he did for them was walnut acquisition. And he had a whole garage full of blanks, just.
Oh, that's
And I've
cool.
still got one or two of them left here, but he spotted a scope I had on something and said, boy, I'd love to have that for my son's rifle. And I said, it's not a great scope. And he said, no, I like it. It's small. And he said, well, what have I got to do to... I said, I was going to replace it anyways, Larry. And he said, no, I'll give you something for it. I said, no, you can have it. And he said, no, I'll trade you. I'll give you a couple walnut blanks. I go, really? Okay.
Yeah,
So-
yeah.
And, I made it, and it came out nice, but
Turn him up a little.
I was kind of thinking maybe I would checker it, but when I got looking at it, I go, Jim, you're lucky to have gotten it looking as nice as it does. Don't spoil it by trying to checker it and not know what you're doing and wreck it. So I didn't try it. I didn't dare.
So you actually did the woodwork on
Yes.
it? You did that.
I made the stock on it. It came out very nice, and I glass bedded it and free floated the barrel.
Wow.
Action's all glass bedded and, pack mirror recoil pad on it. Just one of the thin ones, the little white liner on it. And,
Yeah.
and I
You still have that gun?
A Neidner grip cap. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I couldn't part with it. I'm going to give it to my youngest boy because he's left-handed.
Yeah. My boys are left-handed as well.
So, but somewhere along the way, I've done a lot. I've hand loaded for 45 years at least, and know a lot about ballistics and fussed with all sorts of different types of bullets, and wasn't pleased with most of what you could buy from the factory. And I killed a tremendous buck with a 270 one time. It was a big 9-pointer. He was with a bunch of does. The doe spotted me, took off running. All the rest of the does followed, but the buck didn't. I didn't have a shot at him. I saw him down in there, and I said, well, if he follows those does and comes up into the open hardwood, I can take him on the run. It was open hardwood.
Mm-hmm.
I don't just wail at deer, but I've killed quite a number of them on the move. And I said, I think I can take him if he comes up through here. So he looked around and then decided, okay, I want my does. And he took off after him. And when he came up through there, I just swung right in with him. And just like you'd hunt birds, guys tell you, lead them, do this, do that. I've never done that. I don't lead them. I put it right on them, and I'm swinging just like on a bird. And I've killed tons of those, and it works. And so I just swung right into him and touched that trigger, and I've never seen anything like it in my life. This buck is in mid-stride. I mean, he's going. And he's off the ground, and he hooks his rack into about a 4-inch sapling, and it spins the entire deer in midair right in front of my eyes.
Wow.
180 degrees facing back the other way, and comes down in the snow. Snow just went everywhere, and I just went, are you kidding me? I've never seen anything so magnificent in my life, I'm looking at the 270 going, wow. So I walk up to it, and I can't even find a mark, no exit wound. I'm put my hand down the side of where I shot at it. Can't find that either. I thought that's really unusual. So buck is obviously dead. Mm-hmm. I open it up. And when I break the diaphragm with a knife, the lungs roll out just red jello.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire, just nothing left. Both lungs just completely destroyed. And then when I pulled the hide up to look where this bullet, now, please don't think I'm knocking a caliber,
Right.
but, and this was a long time ago. This was many, many years ago, and bullet design gets better and better. This was a 130 grain, 270 bullet. I questioned it from square one. I'm not a big light bullet fan, but this bullet did not touch a rib. It went between two ribs. So
disintegrated.
It basically hit nothing.
Yeah.
And disintegrated in the lungs.
Yeah.
Now, I know a lot of people would go, wow, that's great bullet performance. No, it is not. That's total and complete bullet failure is what it is.
Right.
Because if my bullet had hit the forward shoulder, it had just made a mess on the outside.
Yeah.
And that is not, in my estimation, that is not a whitetail round. So, I hunted with a gun a while longer. I went to 150 grain bullets, and I killed some nice bucks with it. But, over the years, I wanted to reduce some weight before I built this 280. I wanted to reduce weight, so I bought a Model 7 in 7mm 08, brand new, and so was the cartridge,
Yeah.
just a 308 neck down, which I liked the round. I liked that whole platform, the 243s, my gun's the 358, which is a necked up 308. But at any rate, the 7mm 08, I said, it should be a pretty nice round. So I look at the bullets. It says 140 grain pointed soft point. Pointed soft point, I think that's a varmint bullet, So I do a little research, and, I called, and somebody said, oh, no, that's the bullet that they designed for this. It's a whitetail round. I thought, okay. I said, you know what I think I'll do? I'll just get a set of dies. Well, you couldn't buy dies. The thing was brand new. So I said, well, I'm going to hunt with it this year. I'll use the 140 grainers. So I'm up on one of my mountains, still hunting along. I came up a brook bed. It was really noisy snow. And when I got to a certain point, I said, this is where I want to be. This is where these bucks, I know the mountain well. I said, the bucks breed does and the stick stuff, and they might be really thick. So I leave the brook, and it's crunch, 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 Take about 5 or 6 steps, and I see 3 does get up, and they don't blow or anything. They just get up and walk away. And I look to my left. Here's a basswood about 2 foot in diameter, and there is a sucker that grew out of the base of that, maybe 6 inches in diameter, which is growing very close to the trunk of the big one. And this buck has used his brow tines on the 6-inch tree, and the rack wrapped around and hit both sides of the big basswood.
Oof, wow.
It was fresh, all the shavings right on top of the snow. I said, wow. I said, can't be in a better spot here, Jim. I reached into my shirt and pulled out, I don't know who owns it now, but a friend of mine designed them, the guy that used to run Avery's Game Farm. And he actually, I don't even think I paid for it. I think Dave gave it to me, Dave Osterhout. And he said, I've designed these grunt calls. What do you think? And I blew on it. And I said, wow, you got it. I mean, you've perfected it. This is exactly what a buck sounds like. You pick up a grunt call and they go, ee.
Yeah.
I go, that isn't what a buck sounds like,
Right.
But this was, brrr, just what a nice mature buck sounds like. So I had that around my neck inside my shirt. And I didn't even take another step, I just brought that grunt call out and I grunted on it. I waited about 20 seconds and grunted twice more. And immediately, a buck answers me back. I said, you got to be kidding me. So I just stood right where I was, and this buck starts coming. And I can see him, and it's all thick. There's no shot. I mean, it's very thick. And you're talking witch hopple, beach brush, everything.
Yeah, yeah, just nasty.
Yeah, and he's coming right to me. And he stops every now and then, raises his head up and displays his rack a little. I'm going, wow, this is a buck, So he keeps coming, and he's expecting a response. I don't respond to him. I'm not moving a muscle because he's already knows where the noise came from, and I'm not gonna. Yeah. And I've got the little 7mm on my shoulder, and I'm just watching over top of the scope,
Yeah.
And he keeps getting closer and closer. I'm going, I'm looking over top and going, Jim, this is ridiculous. He's 40 feet from you, and still coming, And then I decide, it's so thick. I said, well, when he comes between those 2 trees, I'll pull the trigger on him. Well, when he gets just about to the trees, he turns and starts going to the right. And then I realize can't get the rack between the trees. And then I'm going to lose him, because there's a huge blowdown right there.
Yeah.
And he goes into that. Who knows? He's going to smell me. I mean, so close, like 35 feet. And so I make up my mind, shoot him now,
Yeah.
He's just turning. I drop my eye into the scope, and I'm right on the shoulder, and boom, I shoot. He goes straight up into the air, and then it's like, where did he go? Came down, and I'm like, did he drop? And then it's like, he's in the brush, and I'm going, is he down or is he up? And then all of a sudden he goes right up and over that blowdown in midair and goes right down slope, crashing down through there. And I smiled and said, got him. He's done.
Yeah.
I walk over there, nice burst of hair, a little bit of blood.
Yeah.
Go, dead buck. I follow him down slope maybe 75 yards, and he turns and starts paralleling the slope, and it's still all thicker and thick, witch hopple all over. I start finding pieces of meat hanging on the witch hopple where it pulled it off the shoulder.
That's not good.
Going, not good. I found 3 of those. They looked like pieces of bacon.
Yeah.
I said, uh-oh. So I followed this buck. He went into a bunch of deer, and then he circled around a couple times. They're no dummies, they know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
Try to confuse you. And then I just said, you got to get out of the mess, go to the other side and find the track. And sure enough, found the track going out and followed him. And, this is getting late in the afternoon now. And I've been following him maybe an hour, and know that this is not going to be an easy recovery. I'm going to have to catch him in a bed and kill him. And finally, I looked at my watch. I said, Jim, you're like 7 miles from the road, and it's pushing 4 o'clock. So I said, I got to leave the track, So I tied flagging on right where I left his track and headed on out of the woods. You don't sleep at night, you know.
Yeah.
When you got a buck
Yeah.
injured in the woods, you're just sick about it.
Yep.
So then I got up like 4 o'clock and drove back up there, went way back in there. Get in there maybe a half hour after daylight. Maybe 100 yards from where I left his track, he bedded down. I mean, if I pushed it a little bit more, I maybe would have killed him right there.
Yep.
He bedded down, curled up, and the whole bed was solid blood. Then he got up and he only moved about 3 feet, and he bedded down long like a dog would with his legs out in front of him. And there was a lot less blood in that bed. And he had gotten up and walked out of the bed before I got there, you know,
Yep.
sometime probably during the night, and he was walking on 3 legs. So I said, oh, man,
Broke the shoulder. Yeah.
I should be able to run him down. It was about that much snow, you know.
Right.
But the more I followed him, he kept going down, 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 down towards this big swampy area. You know, I ran out of snow. There's no snow down in the lowlands. And, you know, at that point, you know, he's into an area that's just riddled with deer tracks.
Yeah.
You know, trying to decipher out, you know, where did this buck go? And then I hit a track and go, there's a big one, you know, and then I follow it. That's not him, you know. Then you can just zigzag. And, you know, long story short, I never got him, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just magnificent buck. And that bullet came apart on the shoulder of that whitetail.
Yeah.
Right.
And so when I got out, I called a buddy of mine Durwood, he ran the local gun shop down here in Hope. And I told him what happened. He said, I'm not surprised. He said, I bought a Browning in that 7mm 08. And he said, opening weekend, we put a drive on, pushed this little buck to me. And he said, I put it right on him and shot. And he said, it went down, jumped right back up and ran around the end of the hill. It didn't realize that, he said, it went out of my sight. But he said, I ran right up onto the hill and looked down. And the deer was just standing there on the other side looking back. And I'm above him. He doesn't see me. And I put it right on him. This time right on and he said, I shot, and the bullet hit the loin, the spine of the deer, never broke the bone. He said, when I came up over the rise and looked at the deer, I could see a patch of blood on the side of its neck about 8 inches by 8 inches. And he said, when I shot the second time, it dropped him, and I got down there, and he said, the bullet hit the spine and expanded and went the full length, took out about 18 inches of loin.
Yep.
Took the meat, but never touched the bone. And he said the first shot, right in the neck, surface wound, took the hide off and never penetrated the 140 grain pointed soft point, which is a varmint bullet.
Right.
Yeah.
So I called the company. They said, well, you know, Olin makes the ammunition for us. I can give you a guy's name and number you can call. He tests this stuff all the time. So I call and talk to the guy. Oh, no, that's a good whitetail round, you know. He said, we're shooting pigs out every day with this thing. And,
That's pig.
and they're same weight as a whitetail. And I said, really? How much? And he said, oh, they're all 100 pounds. I said, you know, if a bullet isn't built sturdy enough to penetrate the forward shoulder of a 200-pound whitetail, you shouldn't be carrying it.
That's right.
And he goes, oh, well, you know, I think it would, blah, blah, blah. He said, why don't you send me what's left of the box and I'll test them and let you know. So then I got a nice letter back. He said, you know, nothing was wrong with them. They all performed beautifully. Here's a check for $16 to buy a new box of ammo.
Yeah. Cold comfort when you miss a giant buck. Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, yeah. So, you know, what I did was I sold the gun, you know, and I said, you know what, I'm going to have to come up with something different.
Just gonna
And
move that up for you a little.
and so what I did was then I built that 280, and I hunted with it for a while.
Yeah. 280 is great. Great.
And you know, I had some issues with it. You know, I used you know, the Grand Slam bullets.
Yeah.
Spear Grand Slams.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of them penciled right through a whitetail, didn't open up.
That's a tough bullet.
Yeah, and then you know, I had one was too light on a bear, and it killed the bear, but it rode right along the skull, didn't penetrate it, you know.
Yeah.
I said, that's not supposed to do that, you know. So, at any rate, in the meantime, I had seen this 358. An older friend of mine owned it.
Yep.
He was done hunting, and so I approached him and said, Erwin, I'd love to buy that rifle from you. And he said, Jim, I could never part with it. He said, if I did, I would sell it to you for sure. But he said, it's what keeps me going. I keep thinking maybe I'll hunt next year, and that's my rifle. He said, I have to have it here so that it just keeps me going. I said, no, you don't have to explain it to me at all, or when I understand it,
Sure.
So a few years went by and he died. And I didn't know what happened to the guns or anything, but then a friend of mine, who was also a trapper, a good friend of mine, I've known him for years, called me on the phone one day and he said, Jim, I've got, I don't know if you know, but I ended up with all of Irwin's guns. And I said, oh, I didn't know that. And he said, Irwin told me before he died that you wanted this 358.
And then that's special.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
said, yeah. And I said, in the meantime, prices go up on these things. And I'd looked these up on the internet. They were wanting $1,600 a piece for them then.
358.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Today they want $3,500 for them.
Yes, that's right.
So, I said, Bob, I would love to have the gun, but I don't know if I can afford to pay you what it's worth. He said, I didn't ask you that, Jim. I asked you if you were interested in buying the gun. I said, oh, yeah. I said, I'd really love to have it. And he said, just make me an offer. And I said, I'm raising kids. I just looked at him and said, $600? He said, yeah, it's yours. I said, wow, that's fantastic. I said, listen, I don't have the money right now, but I'll stop down to the house and I'll give you a couple $100 and I'll have the other 400 in a week. Mm-hmm. And I ended up selling a 35 Rem.
We were just talking about that. Yeah.
and at any rate, I gave him the money. When I go to pay for he goes, oh, these go with it. 10 boxes.
Oh, yeah. That's gold.
Nice.
Silver tips, 200 grain silver tips.
Yeah. They don't make them.
Yeah, deal and a half.
$50 a box, easy,
Yeah.
So, and so, I was hunting with a 280. It's a good round,
Yes,
you got to tailor your loads and everything. But, I had this 358 and I said, I'm going to hunt with this a little bit. So that fall, I shot my buck with a 280 and then my buddy Bear, wanted me to take him up, hunting up on one of the mountains here. And we went in and, he shot a spike horn and I heard him shoot. I was above him and I came down. I said, what'd you shoot at? He said, it was a spike horn, Jim. But he said, I wounded it or something. And I said, you got blood? He says, yeah, come here. And he showed me and I saw where it went down in and it dropped down to the next bench below it. And I said, Bear, just follow the track slowly. And I said, I'm going to go out this bench and see if I can't cut it off somewhere. Mm-hmm. So, I don't have a buck tag, but I'm helping my buddy finish this deer off.
Sure.
And I ended up dropping its tracks with a 358, a little peep sight on it.
Yeah.
And Bear was thrilled and tagged it, and we got out of the woods. And as it was, it probably would have expired eventually but we would have gone a long ways to get it. Mm-hmm. So at any rate, I said, that thumps him pretty good. And I was able to, I helped him take the deer apart and found the mushroom bullet. I said, wow, that is fantastic.
Yeah,
So, I've got a box and I can show you guys when we're done. I've saved bullets, I'm a nut. If I find bullets that I've shot a buck, even I've got them that I've taken out of coyotes, but mostly bucks. And, I save them. I tell exactly how much the deer weighed, what the rack was, what the bullet, the load, everything. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, those silver tipped 200 grain bullets, they mushroom beautiful. They punch right on through. They give you a good, I don't like bullets that come apart inside. And I know guys will argue, no, I want all the energy inside the buck. Well, I don't.
No, because
want
there's
it to go
way
right-
too much variable to
Yeah.
have bad things happen.
Yep, and I want the bullet to go right through and leave me a good wound channel.
That's
Now, I
right.
know a lot of guys hunt on snow only because they're trackers, but I still hunt on bare ground a lot.
Yep.
And as Mark knows, Mark's done it himself. Shot, tracked bucks on bare ground and killed them. But, you get a blood trail on bare ground, it can be tough.
Oh, yeah.
And so,
Oh, yeah.
I want a good blood trail. I want that bullet to go right through.
Yep.
And so 358 does that. I've been using a long time now. I'm into the 20s somewhere on bucks killed with this rifle. And if I did my part, it's a dead buck.
Yeah.
And some of them drop right in their tracks. I've shot them through the shoulders. It's the only shot I had, right through the shoulders, broke both shoulders and went right out the other side and dropped him right in his tracks.
Nice.
Yeah.
But, it's, I'm hand loading 200 grain bullets at about 25.50.
Oof.
You get up into the 3,000s with a bullet, and velocity is not your friend unless the bullet's tough enough to hang together.
Yeah, for sure.
And, there's a lot of good bullets out there, and there are a lot of good calibers, and I'm not knocking any of them. A good hunter, 308, 30-06, 280, 270, any of them with the right bullet and the right hunter, deadly, absolutely deadly. I'm not a light caliber fan, and I'm not light bullet per caliber fan either.
Right.
That's right.
Because the bullets are intended to come apart,
Right.
and they will not penetrate. Sometimes they will, like the story I told with the 270, but not all of them. And
Right.
But when you go with something like this,
Yeah.
they perform perfectly every time.
I've often been amazed that the 358 didn't gain such popularity. It just came in during the Magnum craze, and so
and the little brother, the 243 was a Fast and Furious, and really good on varmints. And if you hit a whitetail right with it, it's okay. And I don't care what anybody thinks of it. I think a 243 is too light for whitetails.
I think so, especially in the
And,
mountains.
and I know guys kill them with it all the time.
Sure.
And farmland deer, there's no brush and there's no nothing. Okay, you're a good shot and you place it right behind the forward shoulder, you probably have a dead buck. But, for woods hunting, no. And, I prefer something with a little more weight. But that was a great round, that 243, and it took the world by storm at the same time they brought out the 358.
Yeah.
And, there's nothing special about the ballistics, but you need to take it out and kill critters with it to find out that, wow.
Yeah.
That's a winner. You've basically created a 35 Remington that's going 400 feet a second faster, and it hits a whitetail. It absolutely thumps them.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the whaling.
Yeah. And, in the whaling, same thing. It's a fantastic round.
Hammers them.
The only issue is if you're going to compare recoil and amount of powder used, you're using a lot more in the whaling.
That's right.
Right.
And you are going a couple hundred feet a second faster with a 200 grain bullet,
Yeah.
but you don't need any more than the 2,500 feet a second. It just
That's right.
absolutely thumps them.
Yeah.
And I have a whale, actually improved, and it's a thumper.
Yeah, it's kind of painful. Yeah. So what do you use now that you hand load? What do you use for the bullets?
In this?
Yeah.
Well, I happen to have, I was able to get a hold of a bunch of the 200 grain silver tip
Really?
Winchesters.
You were?
Yeah, and I've had them for years. But, I'm a hunter safety instructor, and they keep sending all this information on what they've been finding out with lead bullets. And I might, they're saying that a little piece the size of a BB or a little bigger of lead will kill a bald eagle.
Yeah.
I'm like, really? So, you're just giving me pause to, I'm hand loading them. Maybe I should use I got a bunch of those
Barnes.
TSXX Barnes bullets.
That's what I've been using.
200 grains, and it's all copper. So you're avoiding that issue. And I'm not saying I'm totally on board with the no lead or any of that, but I just thought, hey, let's be conscientious about it. And
Well, I think you're going to like them because they do not come apart.
yeah, that was my caveat, and I'm gonna.
They are
use them.
great.
But I think it's a good bullet from what I've read about it. It hangs together very well, and so that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like the 358 a lot.
Yeah.
I can't see myself hunting with anything else because, the gun's pretty beat up. I've refinished the stock several times, but, I hunt in the rain, the snow, whatever, and you just can't keep a finish on them.
I know.
And,
So for the audience, what is that model?
it's a Model 88 Winchester. And, since I had to have the pacemaker put in, my doctor's telling me, don't be shooting that thing without putting a recoil pad on it. And so, I don't want to cut the stock on a $3,500 rifle. Although, I don't know why I even think that way, because my rifle, it's never going anywhere.
Right.
So, but I haven't brought myself to do that. And I do have a Model 99 and 358 that has a recoil pad on it already, and but it's hard to change to a different gun because I've just have taken so many bucks with it and so many beauties. Just about every nice rack buck I look at, I go, yep, 358.
Yeah.
And I've killed quite a few with a 282, but I really partial to the 358 Winchester.
So on the topic of gear too, I'm curious what you bring with you into the woods. I mean, I sense you're more of a minimalist. Do you and what do you bring your gear in? Do you have a fanny pack or a backpack you bring?
No, I carry a full pack because I don't drag deer.
Yeah.
I wear a a full wool pack.
Okay.
I have another one that's polar fleece, but I like the wool one better.
Yep.
But I don't go for a lot of these companies that have packs. They're just nylon. I mean, they're camo. So what?
Yeah.
I want a quiet pack.
Yeah.
I want a backpack that the brush is not making noise.
Yeah, ours is wool.
Yeah.
Liquid's backpack is wool.
And so, and I find that most of the day packs, including I think the one I've seen yours, they're small.
Yeah.
I carry more gear than that, and I want to be able to put a whole buck in my pack. I'm in the 40s now with completely deboning a buck, and bringing it out of the woods in a pack. I carry 4 2.5 gallon Ziploc bags with me, and all of the, one hind quarter in one hind quarter in another, miscellaneous groups and muscles, and the forward shoulders will go in one, and the loins and the filet mignons in the other, and then the neck roast gets left in the cape because I'm carrying that out anyways.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that's what I do. It works really well. I leave the whole head intact because I love to enjoy my bucks. The first one I did way back, I cut the horns out of it, and I just felt so cheated.
Yeah.
I love to look at a buck.
You were saying before we got started that you put it out in your trapper shack and look at it, and
right outside, here. My woodshed's attached to the
here.
house,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I have a door that goes into the woodshed with a half glass in it, and bucks are special. I'm just like a little kid after all these years. I still, I go out there and flick the light on and go, oh, what a nice buck. And shut it off. Maybe a couple hours later, or just before I go up to bed, flick it on. Oh, thank you, Lord, what a buck.
I think sometimes that, there's this old fable about, you hang your buck for 6 days, you hang it for 5 days. I swear it's just so everybody can gawk.
I've never done that because it's not a controlled environment. But the idea is that you age your venison.
I know.
And I age my venison, I bring it in here. It goes into a small refrigerator, and I age it for about 10 days. It makes all the difference in the world before you cut it up.
Right.
Yeah, it does. There's no question about it. But the idea that you'd leave it on the hoof, it goes up to 65 degrees,
Yeah.
I know guys that have taken them down, and they're all covered with mold, and they stink, and they cut the meat up and go, yeah, it's good.
Yeah. So other than your deboning pack out gear, are you survival equipment? Are you bringing fire starter, your typical emergency blanket, that kind of thing?
If I'm going to be real close, maybe I won't bring the emergency blanket, but as you get older, when you get to my age, it's a good idea if you have stuff that can keep you overnight.
Right.
I don't know if you guys have seen the SOL small bivy sacks.
Yeah, sure.
I have one.
They're like a tent.
They weigh nothing. They're just they're like a little sleeping bag. They're reflective material, and they're shockingly warm.
Yeah.
And they weigh nothing. And if I'm going to roam 5, 6, 7 miles from the road at my age, I have one with me.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
And I do carry a not your little cheap roll-up space blanket, but one that's a little nicer than that.
Yeah.
Made by the same company. I think it's SOL.
Yep.
And at any rate,
So you got a good amount of gear on your back.
I do.
10-pound pack, I would think.
No, it's more than that. Yeah, it's definitely more than that. And map and compass, and there's more than that. I mean, I have matches, I have lighters, I have 4 flashlights. They're all small.
Yeah.
All high quality, and I have extra batteries because I have a little very small light headlamp.
Right.
I have extra batteries for it. But if you're a long ways from the road and you kill something just before dark and you start taking them apart, I don't care what flashlight it is. 45 minutes later,
it's not much.
It's not much.
Yeah.
And so then I have another one, and
Yeah.
Years ago, I mean, I killed a bear back in. It was amazing because I was always coming out and telling Lori, I saw a beautiful bear today. And she would say, why didn't you shoot it? And she said, you're always telling me bear stories and you never shoot them. And I said, nah, they ruin a good day of buck hunting.
Yeah. Right.
Well, about 4 or 5 days later, we were watching a documentary about an area out west that had, they were reintroducing moose, and they couldn't understand what was going on. They were having 80% mortality with the calves. And so they radio collared a whole bunch of moose and found out that black bears were coming in and taking the calves as soon as they were born. And when the video got done, they said, oh, yeah, we put a special hunt on and we killed over 200 black bears in this one small area.
Wow.
And they put out 500 permits and filled 200 of them.
Wow.
And so at any rate, the mortality dropped to 20%. And then the guy finished by saying, yeah, when we found out that they kill a lot of whitetail fawns too.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And I looked at Lori and said, the next black bear I see I'm going to kill, where it was only 3 days later, I'm way back in. I'd been in, well, maybe a week later, I'd been in for 5 days into my wall tent. And it was the day I was supposed to come out, you know, so I'm still hunting down back towards my tent, but I'm about 2.5, 3 miles above it, and snow on the ground. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere comes this bear. And I go, boy, that's a dandy, you know. I throw the gun up. It's all thick witch hobble, and it's not a good shot. But all of a sudden, he jumps up onto a log about 3 foot in diameter. It's like, here I am, you know, going to run the length of the log.
Shoot me.
So I just swung right into him, boom. And as soon as the shot went off, he like spun and went right straight away.
Yep.
And I levered in another round, came right down on him, boom.
Yeah.
And I saw him dive forward, and he was done. I hit him right there. And so now it's fairly late in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, Jim, you're supposed to be going out today, and now you've got a bear to deal with.
Yeah, they're a lot.
And they're a lot, and it was a beauty. And I'll tell you what, this bear was very interesting because I had no idea how long bears live. And, you know, New York State, you're required to pull the
Send in
tooth
the
and send it in, you know. So when I got the tooth back, I find out my bear is 27 years old.
Oh my God.
27?
27
Wild.
years old.
Put it away.
I didn't even
So-
know they got that old.
Well,
That's wild.
that was so I called down there. I said, 27? I said, I didn't know bears live that old. And they said, oh, yeah, Jim, the oldest one we have is 41.
Holy
Whoa.
cow.
So
I did not
bears
know.
live a lot longer than
I
bucks.
had no idea. That's
Yeah.
wild.
So that was new to me, too.
Yeah.
So at any rate, this bear I thought it was a male because it was big.
Yeah.
But when I got up to it and started messing with it, I go, this is a female.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. I mean,
Yeah.
and I asked them down there, I said, what are the bigger females that you've recorded down there? And they said, well, the one that was 41 years old was 150 pounds.
On its way down, maybe.
Female. And they said, generally, females don't get too much bigger than 250 maybe would be a really big one. I would say this was all of that.
Wow. Yeah.
She was gorgeous, and the fur on it was like,
Yeah.
so I tanned the hide. I had it for years, but they deteriorate over time. This would have been back in the late 80s or early 90s
Right.
that I killed that bear. But I start taking it apart, and, you know, in no time, it's dark, you know.
Yeah.
First thing I did, of course, was get the gall off of the liver, and I set it up on a stump near me. And then, you know, you start taking apart the meat and stripping the loins and everything, and there's a lot of meat on a big
There
bear.
is.
Yeah.
So, you
There
know,
is.
I'm trimming fat and trying to,
Yeah.
but, you know, I've got it in separate bags, and then I'm realizing you can't carry all this in that rough-skinned hide. I bet the rough-skinned hide, and I left the skull in it. I wanted the skull. It was a big bear. And I bet that weighed 80 pounds just on its own, the rough-skinned hide and the skull.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, I can't get all this meat out in one day. So I put a bunch of it in bags, and I put it up in the tree and took out what I could. And, you know, I'm working on this thing. And this was early on, so I wasn't carrying 4 flashlights. I had 2, but they were both mini mags. Didn't have headlamps in those days at all, you know. It was,
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
For those days.
It's dark, and I got a mini mag in my mouth, and I'm taking this bear completely apart.
Yeah.
And I was well along on it, and I hear this snap, snap, snap right behind me. I go, what in the world? I pull the mini mag out, shine behind me. Here's a yearling bear. But I'm talking standing over 6 feet tall, you know, probably 140, 50 pounds.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was probably her cub from 2 years
Right.
before.
That's right.
I never saw any other bear with it, but obviously they were traveling somewhat close together.
Right.
And then, you know, he's like, where did she go? Came back. He was probably way ahead and then came back. And of course, you know, I turn around with a mini mag and here he is, you know, standing about 10 feet behind me, standing up like a person would, you know.
Oh.
And I just said, get out of here. And, you know, the deepest voice I could muster. And he about turned over backwards and ran up over the hill. And then I looked around and said, where is my rifle? And I just slid it over next to me. You know, he's not coming back. But, you know, it does startle you a little bit.
It does.
When you don't have any rifle, you know, near you.
Yeah.
But so I got the thing taken care of. I start out, you know, I put as much as I could carry in the pack, throw this hide around my neck. Now, the skull is still in it. So I start to walk, and I'm tripping over the feet of the bear. So I said, well, you got to shift it. So I slide the thing around, but now the head is so unwieldy because it's down around my waist. And every step, it's swinging. And I'm trying to, how am I going to keep that thing from swinging, you know? And then shift it back a little bit that way. Then I'm tripping on the foot again. And I said, this is ridiculous, you know? And it's a lot of weight. I did not weigh that whole thing, but I know I was carrying 150 pounds easy.
Yeah.
And so I'm working my way down, and I thought, I got to come to the trail soon, you know. Now I've completely bypassed going to my wall tent because that's out of the way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
You know, I'm just trying to head for the trail.
You're in survival mode.
Yeah, I want to get out of the woods because my wife is expecting me, you know, because
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be out. And usually the day I come out, I'm usually out home by dark or just after, you know.
This is I'll edit this out, but this is the East Branch Sacandaga Trail,
It is, yeah.
which goes quite a
Goes
bit
right-
uphill.
Right
Like,
up over the mountain coming
Yeah.
out. Yeah. So, but I'm concentrating on getting to the trail, and I know that if once I get in an open trail, I can make a lot better time.
Right.
Because, you know, this
Yes.
big hide is hanging, dragging and catching on witch hopple and everything, you know. Ridiculous. You know, a couple of times I'm like flipping the feet up over my shoulder and you got blood all over you.
Yeah.
And so finally I said, all right, I look at my watch. If I don't come to the trail in 5 minutes, I'm going to stop and skin the head out of this thing.
Yeah.
So I go 5 more minutes, I'm not on the trail. So I said, okay, I'm in kind of a little bit of a balsam first section. I said, I can take the skull and poke it up in the branches here, just set it up in there. So I put the mini mag back in the mouth, skin the head out of this thing, set it up in the tree. Huge difference. You know, as soon as I pick
Yeah.
up the hide, I go, wow, this is great. So I put it back around my neck. I went maybe 25 feet and stepped right in the middle of the trail.
That's the way that is.
Yeah. So then I hustled right out. I mean,
Yeah.
you hustle out with 150, you know, probably without the skull, and it's probably 135 pounds or something, you know. But
Yeah.
anyways, I hustle right out. I'm out like 10:30 at night.
Yeah. Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And Lori's like, oh my goodness, I was getting worried, you know.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, I was worried that you were worried. You know?
Yeah.
So
That's where the inReach comes in handy. You know,
Yeah.
Not that you would have had it back in the day, but
then I get into my pack and realize the gall, I forgot to put it. I always put it in a little Ziploc bag.
Just sitting on that stump.
It's still sitting on the stump. And I'm like, how could you have done this, you know? I mean, the galls were worth money.
yeah, like
Yeah.
200
A lot
bucks,
of money.
right?
This was
Yeah.
of all the bears I've killed, and it's probably because of the age, it was a female, but her gall was like this, you know, way bigger than a chicken's egg. I mean, just huge. And, you know, you very carefully trim it away from the liver so it retains all its content, you know, and you can't miss them. They're bright lime green in color, you know, the gall is. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, something's going to get into that overnight and I'll be out whatever I get for the gall. But I said, well, you got to go get meat anyway, so that's what you're doing tomorrow, you know. So I got up super early, went all the way back in there, got all the rest of the meat, took my time, cleaned a lot of it off the bone, put it in fresh Ziplocs, and then got my gall and put it in a Ziploc and brought it out. And when I got out, I told Lori, I said, you know what? I was wrong. Doesn't ruin a good day of buck hunting. It ruins two.
Yeah, there you go.
But the bear was fantastic eating. We did it, you know, cut it thick steaks, and Lori did it as a pot roast. It was delicious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that,
So I have one last question for me anyway. What is of all the bucks you shot, your favorite one? The one that means the most? I know it's tough.
it is tough because, you know, sometimes early in your hunting career, it's a smaller buck that was special,
Sure.
you know. But there's a lot of them. I want to say that bucks that you walk up and kill in their bed, that big 8-pointer, I can show you a picture of him on the computer. He's a beauty. He was a beautiful buck, and he had no idea was there. That was the story I told about. He was a nice, mature, you know, you can tell an older buck when you take them apart. You know, the skull plates are big.
Yes.
They're broader, wider. He was an old, you know, he's 4.5-year-old buck. Nice 8-point rack on him.
Yep.
So, you know, those are special. That 8-pointer was a great buck. But there are others too. And I remember sometimes when you guess right, it becomes a special memory. You know, I was going in. I had a couple of bucks I'd been chasing. There was one really big track and another one they were chasing does on top of this mountain. And I was hunted in there all day and came close and, you know, said, I'm going back, you know. So I'm on my way back in there. It was fairly late, you know, past mid-November, but, you know, bucks were still chasing does and a lot going on. And I said, man, you got to be in the woods during this, you know. So I'm on my way going up into the mountain. Now I kind of go through an area where there's a notch that I kind of go by going up in where I'm going. And I'm hustling right along and I go, oh, there's a fresh deer track, you know. And I walk up and I go, big doe. I'm heading down, you know, and I go about 20 feet further, another doe. A little bit further, 50 feet, 2 more does. All 4 of them big-footed does. And I said, I think I'm going to abandon what I was going to do. What would you do in that case, Mark?
I'd backtrack.
I backtracked those does. And I just started still hunting backwards on those 4 doe tracks.
Yeah, there you go.
About 40 minutes later, I come over just a slight rise, and here's this big 10-pointer in his bed. He spotted me about when I spotted him. And as he was getting up, I put it right on him, but it was pretty brushy. And I fired, and then he spun and he went off at an angle, and I had by then levered in another round and came right down on him. And when I touched that one off, I said, that's a dead buck, you know.
Yeah.
And I saw him falter before he went out of sight. And when I got up to him, I had hit him right behind the forward shoulder going away, and it came right out his chest. And he was a beautiful 10-pointer, you know.
Nice.
And it was a good hunt. I guessed right. There was a buck trailing those does, and I was able to get him.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are special hunts for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, he wasn't way up on the mountain. I was about a mile and a half, good snow on the ground, all downhill. I said, this is a monster buck. I mean, he's heavy, really a heavy buck. And so I said, I'm going to take my time. And, you know, I killed him like 9 o'clock, 9:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are nice hunts.
Yeah.
You're
and
not all wore out.
Yeah, and you know, so I just started dragging him downhill. Not exactly the way I went in because I traveled quite a bit to the east before. So I just angled down in, heading, you know, and finally came out to where I said, oh yeah, I know right where I am, and I was able to get him out whole. I brought him down and weighed him. He was 194.
Ooh. So have you broke 200?
What's that?
Have you broke 200?
I have twice. The big tent that I was just showing you, he dressed exactly 200 on the hoof.
Nice.
Yeah.
Boy, he was a slammer.
Yeah.
His chest was just massive on that buck. When I stood over him on the ground, I was just like, wow.
Yeah.
And then way back years ago, I killed one way back in the interior Siamese, about 8-9 miles from the road, right up on top of, I don't want to mention the name of the mountain, but, you know, a long ways from the road. It took me 3.5 days to get him out.
Wow.
But I wanted him out because the rack wasn't huge, but it was gorgeous. You know, it was gnarly and only about a 14-inch spread. Big, massive, tight tines. And like a fool, I gave a friend of mine the rack.
I've done that. Yeah.
Dumb.
Yeah.
Anyways, you know, I wanted to know what he weighed because it was a big buck, you know. And after 3.5 days, which they
dry out.
They dry out. They dehydrate water weight every day that you don't have them on the scale. And he weighed 201.
So he's a 210-pound buck.
Yeah.
In the Adirondacks. That's an absolute world-class slammer for
Yeah,
here.
it's a slammer for up here.
Yeah.
But I've taken old Square Toes. I dragged him out. Don't ask me why. I mean, I had such a connection with the buck, I could hardly part with taking him apart in the woods.
Yeah.
I brought him out whole, and I wanted to know what he weighed because he was big and gray and every rib showing and scars all over his neck from defending his territory. And
Just
you
a
know,
cool
just
buck.
an old monarch. You pull up his jaw and you go, oh my goodness. Now I know how to age deer because I worked for the department for about 10 years, and I had a wildlife guy that was a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
And he taught me how to age whitetails, and I even had a little sandwich sign with all the different jaw bones
Yeah.
on it, and I worked at it for years. But
Yeah.
this buck, I just looked and go, I have no clue. I mean, there's nothing left of his teeth, you know.
Yeah.
But I gave it to my buddy Dick, and he said, yeah, give me the jaw, Jim, because the only way to do it is, you know, we can actually analyze the tooth, drill it, and
Yeah.
Yep.
and so he called me in a few days. He said, yeah, that's the oldest one I've done in a few years. It's 10 and a half years old.
It's wild.
But
Yeah.
I hunted him for 4 years, and you know, I looked at him, and he was just worn right down from rutting, you know.
Yeah.
And you'll see the story in the book. You know, he was trying to feed up a little bit. You know, it was at the end of the season, and I don't know what he would have weighed if I'd killed him 2-3 weeks before that, before he was chasing does, but. He weighed 197 when I got him.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, he'd be a 230-pound buck.
Yeah, and you know,
Huge.
I put him on there's good scales at Joe Garling's, you know, down at the other end of town, you
Right.
know, and they are, you know, they slide the weights forward and all that, you know, and looking at 197, I'm going, start over, Jim.
Yeah.
Slide the weights back, pull the buck a couple times, let go of it, you know, and
Can we breathe on him?
yeah, then like, you know, inch him back out, but I couldn't get any more. It was 197, but I was still thrilled with him, you know, it was
yeah.
a beautiful buck,
Yeah.
an old timer that, you know,
That's amazing.
once in a lifetime, you know, to hunt a buck for 4 years
Yeah.
and to actually kill him, you know, he'd have to be right up on the list there with my favorite buck just because of what went into harvesting him.
Yeah.
But, you know, God's been so gracious to me. You know, doesn't matter to him whether I kill bucks, but it matters to me. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
he shines on me and lets me killed an awful lot of bucks.
Yeah. That's a
But
special
I'm
thing.
very thankful, and you know, it's a special thing to hunt whitetails.
Yeah.
It really
Yeah.
is.
No, I think one of your first emails you sent me, you expressed that exact sentiment, just how lucky you feel to have spent your life in the woods, and
Yeah,
because we, corresponded over email for years, and
yeah,
it really resounded with me because it is a privilege. To
yeah.
be
And I have so enjoyed both of you guys, your friendship.
Well, we feel honored
yeah.
to be here.
We really do, and we have to talk about brookies. Of course, we're not going to go anywhere near naming ponds, but we got to cover it for the fans.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I first met Jim at a brookie pond, and I was trolling a Lake Clear wobbler. This is when I was just getting into it. I had a Radisson, which weighed like 40 pounds. Me and Eddie carried that back. That pond isn't that far in.
No.
But, it was no hornback. It was a 40-pound canoe.
And that
And,
is kind of a rough trail. It's kind of narrow and swampy. And
Yeah, thanks. In my defense, yep.
Yeah.
So Jim, somehow you got ahead of us on the trail because it like parts at a certain point.
well, it's pretty sketchy at one
And,
point.
like-
I knew where I was going. Yes.
So us two young guys and like Jim just like by the time we get up there, so we parked first, yet somehow he was up there with his hornback by the time we got up there. But anyway, I was trolling like a Lake Clear, the traditional way. I don't know, and Jim is just catching fish after fish after fish, trolling sinking line, and it introduced me to a whole new world. And we started corresponding, and subsequently, Weatherwell put out a video where you discuss your technique with sinking line.
Yeah.
In any event, that's just to give the viewers a little bit of an intro on your expertise with brookie fishing. How did you develop your style? Well, let's start from the beginning. I mean, was brookie fishing always a part of your life?
It
growing
was,
up?
stream fishing when I was a kid, and
Yeah.
I was mesmerized by brook trout. They're definitely the most beautiful fish God ever
Oh, yeah.
created, and so, the colors, especially in the fall brook trout is the most beautiful thing you ever. I can hardly pull my eyes away from them. They're gorgeous,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so. At some point I said, I got to try flies too, so I started fooling around a little bit, and I don't know where it was. I read something about possibly trolling flies, and I dabbled with it and did quite a bit of it, and actually caught some fish, and tried a lot of different nymphs and wet flies, and I was in my teens and early 20s, and I kept doing it, and sometimes I'd have a Lake Clear wobbler, and other times, I had both of them with me, and but I got to the point where I wasn't thrilled with a Lake Clear. I eat probably as many fish as the next guy, but I let a lot of fish go. Most of the fish I let go. How many can one guy eat, And so, the Lake Clear, a lot of them you can't let go. They've swallowed the worm, and unless you cut the hook off and start over, But and most guys don't do that. They may say they do. They pull the worm out and throw it back and it dies, And I've gone around ponds where there are guys were fishing. There's 10 or 12 floaters going around, And so I was a little bit more partial to the flies, and then I started perfecting my technique. And then when I became a ranger, Vic Sassy was the forest ranger in North River. He was my boss, and he was a tremendous man, I think I'd been working for him like 2 months, and I said, well, boss, where do you want to go today? And he said, Jim, you're the best thing ever happened to me. He said, you're the real deal. You're a woodsman. And he said, don't call me boss. He said, from this point forward, we're partners.
Nice.
Now, that's not true because he was my boss.
Right.
But he treated me as an equal, and he did all the way through the 10 years I worked for him. Everything we did, he said, what do you think, Jim? What do you, And searches, he'd let me lead everything. Just a tremendous man. But he, early on, he said, oh, yeah, see, you got a fly rod. And I said, oh, yeah. I said, I love to fly fish. He said, what do you do? And I said, I got dry and wet, but I said I prefer, sinking lines. And he looked at me and goes, are you serious? He said, I've been doing that for years. And I said, wow.
Yeah.
So he said, next day off, let's go, So, we struck up a friendship there. And, if you look at the video, you'll find out that I had other people that I met as a ranger that were instrumental. And, I had a guy he's famous, and Roger Menard was his name. He's written books, and but he just bumps into me, and we get talking, and finds out I'm a fly fisherman, and he's given me flies by the hundreds over the time that I knew Roger. He probably gave me 150, 200 flies.
Right. That's the way the outdoors is.
Yeah. And
Brings people together.
And he kept saying, try this pattern because of this, and after a while, I've been doing it now a long time.
Yeah.
And I have it pretty perfected. Every line is different, even when they tell you they're designated the same. And you fish them for a while, you understand the depth that you're at. And once you know your ponds and, I hit bottom here and I'm in 12 feet of water, I need to pick up the pace or move out a little,
Right.
And over a period of time, you really understand what the fly's doing. And, there are ponds where, like in the summertime, they tell you that you can't catch brook trout because, the water's warm and they're not active and whatever, which is a little bit true. But, if you want to catch brook trout, and I would say if you're not going to keep them, don't fish them because you can tax them,
Yeah.
But, if you just wanted a couple nice trout to eat, you can fish right on the bottom or very close to the bottom.
Right.
And I would just drag a nymph right out of the mud. I'd watch my rod tip, you'd strip out a bunch of line while you're rowing away.
Right.
Let it settle down and get your oars ready to go. And when the fly touches the bottom, the rod tip just a slight tip, but it just touched down. And you immediately twitch it.
Yeah.
It brings the fly up out of the mud, and then I just let it drop down and touch. Watch my rod tip again. When it touched, boom, and I would just stroke again forward, and usually second or third twitch.
Yeah, right.
They hit that thing.
Sounds like a title for that would be bottom trolling or something. Yeah.
And I'm talking beautiful fish. All your big fish are laying on the bottom. And
if you don't mind, I'll put some of your fish pics on social media. Or not. It's up
fine.
to you.
Yeah, you can do that.
Well, no, of course, I'd never betray any pond names you've told me in confidence. How many ponds do you think you've fished?
Oh, it's funny because a friend of mine was telling me, and he's a good brook trout fisherman. He's a wonderful guy. He's a good woodsman too. This guy out of North Creek. He's Frank Shaw is his name, but he's a good buck hunter and he's a good trout fisherman. And he said, I just fished my 100th pond. And I thought, that's great. And I thought, I wonder how many ponds I've been to, how many I've fished. And, it's nowhere near a comprehensive list, but I went home and I started naming off, writing down, looking at maps and just, putting a pencil circle. And, within 45 minutes, I'm at more than 150.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so I don't know
Yeah.
how many, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
Not all of them did I catch fish either.
So, you probably got to get going, I guess, huh?
Going pretty quick here. Yep. Lori just came down the stairs and tapped on her watch.
Okay, so yeah, we can wrap it up. Jim, this is awesome. I've wanted to do this for years. You're always at a pond or in the woods, as the viewers might expect. So I'm so glad we finally got to do this.
Yeah.
And thank you. Just thank you for sharing your knowledge. I'm certain the viewers are going to love it. So
Well, I'm super glad that we
Yeah.
could just spend a day and
that too. It's just
visit.
great
It's just
spending time with you.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's amazing.
yeah, you guys are great friends.
Oh, thanks,
Yeah,
Jim. We feel
that's
the
how
same
we feel.
way.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'll do my little outro. All right, all you legends, thanks for tuning in to the Adirondack Hunt Podcast, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Adirondack Hunt Podcast. You can find more episodes at bigwoodsbucks.com. Check out bigwoodsbucks.com for the latest gear, including our famous American-made wool hunting jackets, wool hunting fanny packs, and wool hunting pants, along with books, tracking guides, and logo wear. See you next time.